Law was kind of the default for me. I went to college, and in the U.S., you do a 4-year undergraduate degree, and then law is an additional 3 years. And I got a degree in English literature, which is not a high-paying career in the United States. And so I knew I was going to need to do some sort of graduate program. And wanted to go to law school because of, I was interested in government and politics and things like that. But when I got into law school, I got more interested in trial work and actually representing clients in trial and, standing up and making arguments. At that large law firm, I realized, A, it's a lot of work. The expectations are very high. The billable hour requirements are very high. B, you don't get in front of judges or juries or things like that very often. I was looking at it and thinking, it's going to be 30 years before I actually get in front of a jury. And then I moved to a smaller plaintiff side firm, which is representing the people suing nursing homes, doctors, and, other people. And, realized again, even though you're on the other side of the equation, you're not going to get to go to trial very often. And so, after that firm, I started a criminal defense firm with one of my friends from law school. I felt like I was actively helping people, very one-on-one, very much in the courtroom every week, and you're helping people work out their problems. In representing criminal clients, I saw a lot of repetition. Don't really have familiarity with what goes on in courtrooms and things like that. Because people would miss their court dates. A lot of bad outcomes for people when there didn't need to be bad outcomes. And so I ended up working with a developer locally to create the first web app, whenismycourtdate.com. It's not around anymore. The more you know about technology's capabilities, the better. If you're defining product specifications, it's best to work with a developer who has some experience in, translating requirements, because that is an art. So there's a great illustration, and I wish I could show it, but it's, the development process where, it's 2 tracks, one on the top, one on the bottom. And it's from, an idea to creating a car. When you start out, what is the base model that I can get away with making, and get that to work and see if people will use that, see if they like that. Also, I think it's really instructive to look at what other software as a service companies, Google is a great example, I think, specifically in how things work and how they integrate things. Like if you look at something that Google makes, you instantly know it's by Google just by the way it looks. I really recommend starting out with Python because it's easy to read. The syntax makes sense, at least to me. It's very visual, how things are laid out on the screen. And it's just it makes logical sense. Whereas if you start, source I found was this book called Learn Python the Hard Way. The thing I'd recommend is, we have hackathons here in town, things like that. Even though it's not legal related, I would go and participate and just learn from other people. Tools like Miro So Pro Bono Net is a nonprofit. It's based in New York, a nonprofit doing technology development for legal aids and legally focused nonprofits, as well as government agencies, to help people with their legal problems. We develop a number of websites. We run the lawhelp.org platform. We also run the national lawhelp.org site that points people to all, 50 states as well as territories, to get legal information. We run the Pro Bono.net platform, which is a distributed knowledge management. One of my projects is the Docassemble videos on YouTube. And, if you're not familiar with Docassemble is a document generation tool that's free and open source. You mentioned legal optics, and I'll talk about that one. So I wanted to be able to show people what that actually meant, where they could say, I have a marijuana case. What happens in a typical case like mine? So I think the first way is then freeing up information for people, like on Pro Bono Net, our law help site, freeing up that information where people can get on Google, look up their legal problem and then see information about that legal problem that's written by somebody who knows about it. And that, I think, is one of the key. Those people the tools to understand their cases and then take actions in their cases. And then on the flip side, to assist attorneys that want to do pro bono representation, to make their jobs easier so that they can take more pro bono cases so it's not really hard to take on a pro bono case. And two, to give attorneys the tools to be able to do cases like those kinds of cases at a lower cost to their business. A good example is there's a tool in Canada called Jurisage that fits into Chrome as an internet browser and helps you digest legal decisions just sitting in Chrome while you're reading. If they want to get started with pro bono, the best place to look is a legal nonprofit in their area to see what are the opportunities there for attorneys wanting to just get started in pro bono. It's a really low friction way to do that. I think a lot of attorneys get scared about actually representing someone for the full life of their case. right? And India has, like a really robust online judicial system. In a lot of ways, it's ahead of what the U.S. has. So I think that's really, really cool, and keep up the good work with that.
Today, we have with us Sam Harden. Sam is a lawyer turned coder and now is a program manager at Pro Bono Net. Pro Bono Net focuses on technology and leveraging technology to improve access to justice. And we'll learn more about what Sam really does there. But how I found out about Sam is his videos on Docassemble, which are on YouTube. So that's where I actually found out about Sam, and Sam has also been on Fast Case in 2017, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. So thank you so much for taking out the time to do this interview with Prolog today, Sam.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very excited to be here.
Great. So we just dive right into it. For everybody who doesn't know, Sam actually started out as a lawyer and worked with a couple of law firms and even did his own practice and ran his own firm for a couple of years. So let's start there, Sam. Why did you even decide to do law to begin with?
So law was kind of the default for me. I went to college, and in the U.S., you do a 4-year undergraduate degree, and then law is an additional 3 years. And I got a degree in English literature, which is not a high-paying career in the United States. And so I knew I was going to need to do some sort of graduate program, and gravitated toward law because I didn't know that much about it. I knew I enjoyed logic and that sort of thing. Nobody in my family was in a legal career. They were all in the medical side. And so I kind of went into it blind, and, wanted to go to law school because of, I was interested in government and politics and things like that. But when I got into law school, I got more interested in trial work and actually representing clients in trial and, standing up and making arguments. So that's kind of what got me into it, kind of fell into it, I guess.
When you worked at a law firm as an associate, what was that like? And, from there to really, if you could walk us through your journey to sort of where you are right now.
Mm-hmm. So when I graduated law school, I started out at a large law firm in Florida doing insurance defense, so representing insurance companies when their insureds got sued, representing nursing homes when they got sued or something like that happened, and representing hospitals also in medical malpractice cases. And at that large law firm, I realized, it's a lot of work. The expectations are very high. The billable hour requirements are very high. B, you don't get in front of judges or juries or things like that very often. You don't go to trial hardly ever. And when you do, it's the named partners in the firm that end up trying the cases. And because I wanted to do trial work, I was looking at it and thinking, it's going to be 30 years before I actually get in front of a jury. And I don't know that I can, do that. So that was that first job out of law school. It was a good firm, did good work, but just wasn't for me. And then I moved to a smaller plaintiff side firm, which is representing the people suing nursing homes, doctors, and, other people. And, realized again, even though you're on the other side of the equation, you're not going to get to go to trial very often. In the US, most cases settle. I think it's 95% at this point. And so it's a lot of just negotiation over money. And that is what it is, but, again, wasn't really my passion and what I wanted to do. So, after that firm, I started a criminal defense firm with one of my friends from law school. And, that kind of, business model really fit what I wanted to do, because I felt like I was actively helping people, very one-on-one, very much in the courtroom every week, and you're helping people work out their problems. But, in that kind of business, it's hard to be a starting up firm where, other firms have been established for a long time, have a lot of capital, are able to get clients more easily. And I really didn't want to do any more civil side work, and my partner wanted to transition into that. And so we ended up parting ways after a number of years amicably. But, again, it wasn't really the fit for me. And that's during my time at that firm, that's when I got interested in technology. I started working on my first web app called When Is My Court Date? We can talk a little bit more about that. But, that's kind of where I saw technology's potential to really help people navigate the justice system, and help them on their way.
Sure. So Sam, from there, you then started to pick up coding, right? How did that, where did that interest really come from? How did you decide to sort of take that up?
So in representing criminal clients, I saw a lot of repetition, in the kind of cases, the kind of facts that they had, the kind of problems that they had, that sort of thing, their needs for information. And when somebody, from my perspective, got in trouble with the legal system, it was usually the first time that they had ever interacted with the court system. Like they had never been to court. They may have had a traffic ticket before, but they either paid it or did traffic school online or something like that. People, don't really have familiarity with what goes on in courtrooms and things like that. And one of the, things that I saw over and over sitting in court is people would miss their court dates. Mm-hmm. In a criminal case in the US, you would have a first appearance, and then you'd have different check-in dates, usually once a month until your trial. And judges would require people to show up for their court date. But a lot of people miss those dates. And if that happens, the judge would issue a warrant for their arrest, and then they'd have to sit in jail until their court date. And it led to a lot of bad outcomes for people when there didn't need to be bad outcomes. So I got with my brother-in-law, who is an engineer for YouTube, and said, is there like something that, would work out where people could plug in their case information and figure out when their next court date was? And he kind of gave me some ideas on what would be involved in developing a web app like that, and said, see what you can do with it. And so I ended up working with a developer locally to create the first web app, whenismycourtdate.com. It's not around anymore. But the idea was that people could just put in their case number or their name and see when they needed to be in court, what time, what courtroom, that kind of thing. And, that was pretty successful. I didn't make any money off of it. I offered it for free, but thousands of people would visit the site, and I would actually start getting emails and phone calls because my contact info was on the page, and they would call me and say, like, what do I need to do? What's going on? What does this mean? That kind of thing. And I thought that was really fascinating, that people were actually taking action and using this, to try and help themselves. And that's really what got me interested in, if this works, what else can we do? What other low-hanging fruit are there that we can help people with on the information side when they don't know hardly anything about what's going on?
That's actually very interesting, right? How you sort of picked a problem and went all the way to solve it. And I'm wondering, is it easy to translate requirements to developers without knowing how technology or the backend code or program might work? I mean, I'm just trying to get a sense of how much do I need to know to be able to translate it to somebody to really build a solution for me on the technology side of things?
Mm-hmm. So what I've found is the more you know about technology's capabilities, the better if you're defining product specifications. And if you don't know very much, it's best to work with a developer who has some experience in, translating requirements, because that is an art. If you have someone who has a vision about what something needs to do, and you have a developer that, can develop code really well, but doesn't share that vision, you get a lot of mismatches I've seen, where things don't line up, things don't work as expected. And the person with the vision can feel like, this really didn't do what I wanted it to do. And the developer's thinking, I did what you told me to do. It does its job as you told me. So you really need to be able to, envision what a product needs to do, the things it needs to solve, the problems it needs to solve, and how it needs to do that. And that entire sort of life cycle of the product, where a user's using it, that kind of thing, that's really like an art. It's hard to do. And, I've messed it up, many times, and had to go back and fix things, just communicating with a developer or, things like that. And I've also found it's a continuous process, figuring out not just what the initial vision is, but what, you really want it to do and how it's going to work in practice. It really is difficult.
So, of course, you've done it multiple times, but is there probably something you may have read or come across that helped, shorten that process for you to get to where you are now, where you can really envision a product, and not only in your head, right? Then I think the biggest challenge is to really translate it for other people to work on it.
So there's a great illustration, and I wish I could show it, but it's, the development process where, it's two tracks, one on the top, one on the bottom. And it's from, an idea to creating a car. And on the top, the person is, like step one, they have two wheels. Step two, they have two wheels and a door. Step three, they have two wheels, an engine, and a door, and it goes on until it's a car, and everyone is unhappy until it's, becomes a car. And on the bottom, they start out with a skateboard, and then they have a bicycle, and then they have like a scooter, and then they have a moped, and then they have a car. It's like that. And, everyone is happy because on the first track, the idea is you're trying to get perfection each step of the way, and you're only putting the little pieces into place. And on the bottom, you're actually building something that works at each stage. It's not a car. A skateboard isn't a car, but it gets you from point A to point B. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, because solving the problem is the important thing. It's not how the app looks, how it works, all the bells and whistles, that kind of thing. Those can come later. It's getting from point A to point B. And I think it's in the lean startup, the minimum viable product idea, I think is really essential for, envisioning this. Like, when you start out, what is the base model that I can get away with making, and get that to work and see if people will use that, see if they like that. Don't start out with, oh my gosh, it's going to have so many features, it's going to be so amazing, and it's going to take 3 years to build. And then nobody's going to be happy with it because they haven't used it in the meantime. They don't know what it's supposed to do. So, think about building a skateboard first, start with that minimum viable product. Also, I think it's really instructive to look at what other software as a service companies do that do it well. How they introduce new features, how they introduce new products. Google is a great example, I think, specifically in how things work and how they integrate things. Like, if you look at something that Google makes, you instantly know it's by Google just by the way it looks. whereas, other companies, you don't know, who made this? What is it for? Google is very good about making things simple and making things kind of flow together visually and being well integrated. So that too, I think is good in product development. But yeah, I think for me, it's the minimum viable product idea every time.
Got it. And just going a few steps back, right, where you started to learn code. Where did you start? What was that process like? And how many times? And this is something I want to know personally. Did you want to give up during that process?
So I think the key for me was I started out with low expectations. I measured in English. The highest math level I have is not very high. So, I didn't do computer science in college, or, anything like that in high school. And so it was all new for me. And so I had very low expectations for myself, I think, which helped. And I started out on my brother-in-law's recommendation on Python as a language. And I really recommend starting out with Python because it's easy to read. The syntax makes sense, at least to me. It's very visual, how things are laid out on the screen. And it's just it makes logical sense. Whereas if you start out with something like C#, something JavaScript, something with a lot of symbols, and things like that, it's hard to read, at least for me. But the best resource I found was this book called Learn Python the Hard Way. Okay. And that really helped me understand what was going on. A lot of coding classes, the ones online, things like that, kind of just drop you in and it's sink or swim. Start coding these things, we'll explain them later. And Learn Python the Hard Way takes you. And it was good for me because I didn't know anything, I didn't know how computers work, and says this is what's happening. This is what you're going to do. This is why you're doing it. And it sucks right now. It's not fun, but you need to understand why you're doing it and what you're doing. And, later on, you'll go, okay, yeah, I can put the pieces together. And it would tell you all these things that you needed to know and why you needed to know them. And not just make an assumption that you either knew this stuff or you would just, not ask questions. So I really highly recommend that book. The book has a lot of fans. It has a lot of detractors. It worked for me. But at the end of the day, I think it's whatever works for you, is the best thing. So if it doesn't work for you, don't say I'll never get into programming. Don't say that. Find something that works for you. I also took an in-person class where I live on Python development and then C# and ASP.NET. And I knew most of the Python stuff already, but in-person instruction was really good, but it depends on the instructor too, on the format. And honestly, I got more out of teaching myself through the Learn Python the Hard Way book than I did on, doing that class. The other thing I'd recommend is, we have hackathons here in town, things like that. Even though it's not legal related, I would go and participate and just learn from other people, have them teach me. And that really helped to see how other people do things, and hear new ideas and things like that. That really helped me along as well.
I think that's the last bit is great advice. Just interacting with people who are doing that as their core domain can really help you look at things in a new way. So this is all about Python. Is there anything else that has really helped you sort of? And I'm not asking what coding language is better or not. What I'm trying to understand is what can really help you break down things for a computer, or just for another person who knows how to develop, right? What are those things that have helped you along the way to really build those mental models?
So I think about things visually, how they're going to look, how they're going to function, step to step. tools like Miro, or what is I can't
Mural.
remember Miro, visual mapping tools. So mapping out the flow of, like the user is going to start here, and then they're going to go to this thing, and this is what's going to happen. Mapping that out, at least for me, and the logic that goes along with it, makes translating requirements much easier. Like thinking through that logical flow visually, because for me, I start out with making an assumption about how the end's going to look and what's going to have happened. But if I take the time to sit down and map it out, and sometimes I even do it by hand, just on a piece of paper, that really helps me figure out what I'm missing. Just simply drawing out that flow, you'll see where, you're making assumptions that you shouldn't, where you need additional pieces of information, where additional steps need to happen, and then thinking through like the what ifs along the way on each step. That really helps as well. What if they, realize they're in the wrong app or they're in the wrong process? What options do you give them? What if they don't have this piece of information? What do you tell them? That kind of thing, that really helps as well. So I'd say for a visual person like me, being able to map it out and then, define that flow visually really, really helps.
That's great. And can you perhaps tell us a little bit more about first Pro Bono Net, so that everybody looking at this has a better idea of what really the organization is striving towards, and then your role as the program manager at Pro Bono Net?
So Pro Bono Net is a nonprofit. It's based in New York, in Manhattan. I actually live in Florida, so not in Manhattan. And it's a nonprofit doing technology development for legal aids and legally focused nonprofits, as well as government agencies, to help people with their legal problems. We develop a number of websites. We run the lawhelp.org platform, which is in, I believe, 22 states at this point, where there are statewide informational websites where people can go if they have a legal problem and read information about what they need to do, what their options are, that kind of thing. We also run like the national lawhelp.org site that points people to all, 50 states as well as territories, to get legal information. We run the probono.net platform, which is a distributed knowledge management platform. It's a fancy way of saying like a collaborative platform for legal volunteers, where they can share information, see available pro bono cases, opportunities to volunteer, things like that, as well as, they have email listservs. The one thing, this is an aside, but lawyers love listservs. I don't know if any other profession loves listservs as much as lawyers, but we run those as well on our Pro Bono Net platform. And we also run document assembly tools, for various states where people can answer questions and it creates legal documents for them. It's a platform called Law Help Interactive. So we have all of these technology platforms, and then, some other ones that I haven't talked about, but one of the key things that we do is we also work with the agencies, the legal aids, the nonprofits, the government agencies, and the people involved to really take them through the process of envisioning a product, how it's going to work, is it going to work the way they want, doing that really intensive development process with them, kind of on an ideation to implementation level. And I think that's honestly one of the most valuable services that we do, because, like me starting out, a lot of people aren't familiar with technology. They, have this vision for what they want something to do, but it takes someone who has been there and, seeing all the pitfalls to really guide them through the process. And we have, a really good team of people who do product management, project management, visual design, QA testing, development, things like that. They can work together and get them from, start to solution on that. Yeah.
No, sorry. I have a small segue question, right? Since you're processing so many requests from so many different kind of organizations, what tend to be common themes in that sense that you see recurring themes? Because I'm sure that the same problems are true for a lot of jurisdictions across the world.
Mm-hmm. So, common issues that I see, is that your question?
Yeah.
So I think it really is, the most common to me is the assumption about the solution, what the solution should be. We have this problem, we know what the solution is, we know people are going to use it. They can't not use it, right? We know what the solution is going to be. And, sometimes that solution works, sometimes it doesn't. And so, going through the process and the steps of, really defining requirements and then testing those assumptions each step along the way is key. Because I think, especially with attorneys, and I'm an attorney, so I know you make an assumption that you know what the end is going to be like, right? And attorneys are really good about thinking that we're right all the time, So it's hard. It's hard sometimes to take it and say, maybe I should take a step back and think about, is this right? Let's test it out. Let's see if people will use this. Let's see if they'll click on these things. Let's see if they'll answer these questions. Are we going about this the wrong way? And, is there a simpler way to do things? Is there a different way to do things? I think that to me is the most common thing that I see across the board in the nonprofit world and the for-profit legal world as well. Is kind of, jumping to conclusions that far away and then, not testing things along the way.
Got it. Sorry, so we'll just come back to your role as a program manager.
So as a program manager, I mostly work with the nonprofit organizations and help them develop their solutions. So it's more of like a guiding role. I work with the development team at Pro Bono Net to help define requirements and things like that. I work with a product manager who, helps define the product requirements, do user testing. I work with a visual designer who does these incredible designs that we then test with the users, test with our partners. We use project management software. We use Jira, to manage all the tasks and run through them with the development team. So really in my role, I'm kind of touching every part of the process and helping, guide it as much as I can along the way. I think of it as like a guide. I'm bringing someone to the mountain at the end, right? That's my role. I do some development still, but not in production, usually to test things out. I will help partners with doing grant requests. In the US, a lot of legal aid work is funded through federal grants, where you have to say, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. We need this much money to do it. It's going to help this many people. To define those requirements up front in a way that you have room to be able to test it out and validate your assumptions is really key. So I do a lot of that as well. But really, it's just bringing things all the way through the process from start to finish.
So this is not, of course, you've done your fair bit of practice and you've done coding and all of that, but you've also done a lot of work outside of that, right? Particularly, I'm talking about the YouTube channel, which is you breaking down how to use Docassemble, or even Legal Optics, which will be great if you could sort of walk us through that, right? Mm-hmm. So I mean, we may not have the time to go through all the projects, but maybe like your personal favorites in that sense. And yeah, I think that'll be very, very, I'm very excited to hear about that.
Yeah. So one of my projects is the Docassemble videos on YouTube. And, if you're not familiar with Docassemble is a document generation tool that's free and open source. You can download the source code for it. You can run it on Amazon Web Services. It's developed by a guy named Jonathan Pyle, who is a legal aid attorney and just incredible computer developer. And it is a really powerful tool, and I'm astonished that it's free, because of how powerful it is and what it can do. What makes it powerful is that it's, less a document generation tool and more a general purpose computing tool. So essentially you get a logic engine in the cloud that runs Python code. It develops documents for you, but you can also have it do a ton of different things, like connect to APIs, do calculations, manipulate information, read PDFs, all kinds of things. If you can come up with it, Docassemble can probably find a way to do it. The issue with Docassemble, it is a high learning curve, because it requires knowledge of how to code the interviews, how to work with Python, how to set it up. So, in that way, it's free, yes, but it does require a baseline level of knowledge. And my goal in the Docassemble YouTube videos is to give people that baseline level of knowledge where there's not as much of a learning curve anymore, where they, feel confident in being able to set up Docassemble, have it run, be able to do what they want and see the potential there for it. I don't expect everyone to be like an incredible Docassemble developer, but I think having that familiarity with the tool is super helpful. Even if you don't end up using Docassemble, you get an idea of what's possible with technology in the legal space. So, people that see Docassemble, see its potential, can then go and say like, wow, I can automate these processes, and it'll, I can, get things set up. I can get someone to do it, and it's not as hard as I think. It's attainable. That's my goal there, to really give people that power, that knowledge on, how to do that stuff, and really, how much technology can really help them in law practice, in legal aid, in nonprofits, things like that.
Is there any second favorite project that you'd like to talk about?
So you mentioned Legal Optics, and I'll talk about that one. Not my favorite, but it's notable because it's the one that didn't work out. And this is a great example of assuming the solution before I tested the steps of the problem. So the idea was, and what I saw when I was practicing criminal defense, is people facing the court system have only been in front of court maybe one time, probably no times before that instance, right? They've never been to court. They don't know what's going on. Before I went to law school, I didn't know anything about court. After law school, I still probably didn't know very much about court, right? And so they have no idea. They're at an informational disadvantage. And my idea was, I can use data to give them that information and give them that power to be able to find the attorney that they need, or figure out, maybe I don't need an attorney. Maybe I can work this out by myself. In Florida, we have big and broad public record laws. So you can look up criminal cases online. You can see what happens to them. The dispositions, were people convicted, were they not? And also, criminal defense lawyers want people to hire them. So they would tell people, you're going to be facing a year of jail time, even though it's your first case, you've never been in trouble before, you got caught with, a small amount of marijuana. Yes, technically true, you could face up to a year of jail time. But for 99% of people, that's not what happens to them. They get community service and probation, or they get a fine, and, they go home, or they go in some sort of treatment program and the case is dismissed if they successfully complete it. So I wanted to be able to show people what that actually meant, where they could say, like, I have a marijuana case. What happens in a typical case like mine? And so it took a ton of time to aggregate the data and, try and display it to people in a way that was actually digestible. A ton of time, and I didn't anticipate that. And two, I thought people would be super interested in, like, do I need to hire an attorney or not? What's going to happen in my case? And people were, up to a point. So after I had all this data, I'd spent all this time aggregating it, figuring out a way to display it so it was correct. People were interested, but they still wanted somebody to hold their hand through the process. So, while my site generated some interest, people still wanted to hire an attorney because they felt more comfortable with having an attorney at their side, and they didn't want to have to work things out by themselves if they could help it. So, to me, looking back, that's a great example of, I assumed what the solution would be at the end. And then I went back and tried to arrange all the pieces to make that solution happen. And I didn't test my assumptions along the way. I had read the Lean Startup, which tells you, test your assumptions, build the MVP. And I ignored it. And I shouldn't have. I would have wasted a lot less time. So, that's why, I harp on test your assumptions, build the MVP, figure out what's actually going on, and then, like, see where you need to go, because that has happened to me personally.
There's actually a very interesting thing that you've said, right? Where people still have this sort of affinity to have human touch, or like a human touch point. And I have personally felt that, law is a very, very human-centric sort of a profession, right? You have a human, you have human inputs at each checkpoint. And it's, in that sense, very unpredictable also, I would like to say. Right, like, because there is so much human input at every decision checkpoint, in that sense. So with a system that is not as simple to deconstruct, right, what do you think, like, what are the kind of things that technology can instead focus on? Because you can't take the judge out of the system, and you can't take out the plaintiffs out of the system, or the defendants out of the system. You can't take out the attorneys out of the system. And I'm obviously talking about something that's the cliched legal world in that sense. It's obviously evolved. There are other decisions that lawyers make. But particularly since you work towards justice, and that tends to be the general infrastructure, where is technology really helping?
So I think the first way is in freeing up information for people, like on Pro Bono Net, our law help sites, freeing up that information where people can get on Google, look up their legal problem, and then see information about that legal problem that's written by somebody who knows about it. And that, I think, is one of the keys, because if you've ever Googled something, you can find 5 different answers, right? And you don't know, is that right? But having a trusted source for that information is a great way that technology can free things up for people. For people, and in the US at least, it's a huge percentage of people that go to court without a lawyer, at least on the civil court side. In criminal court, you're guaranteed an attorney if you can't afford one. In civil court, you are not. And so, like, for evictions cases, domestic violence cases, divorce cases, a huge percentage of people, and I forget the exact number, but it's astonishingly high, go to court without an attorney because attorneys simply charge too much, or inaccessible, complicate the process. There's a whole host of reasons why people don't hire attorneys that don't have to do with just, like, I don't have the money to pay, but money is a huge factor. And so giving those people the tools to understand their cases and then take actions in their cases, like to be able to create the documents that they need and understand what they mean, being able to go to court prepared to represent themselves if that's, the path that they're taking. And then on the flip side, to assist attorneys that want to do pro bono representation, to make their jobs easier so that they can take more pro bono cases. So it's not really hard to take on a pro bono case. And two, to give attorneys the tools to be able to do cases like those kinds of cases at a lower cost to their business so that they can lower their rates potentially. At least that's the goal. I don't know if that's, like feasible on that end, but, to lessen the friction there, in that entire process. I think that's where technology can really shine, in the access side. I think, for attorneys, whether or not they're doing pro bono work, technology is really just starting to show what its potential is. There's some really interesting tools coming out that really fit better into attorneys' workflows, that help them digest legal decisions, and aren't a new place for the lawyers to go. I've seen a lot of tools come along and it just adds steps to an attorney's workflow instead of fitting into their workflow. So a good example is there's a tool in Canada called Jurisage that, fits into Chrome, as an internet browser and helps you digest legal decisions, just sitting in Chrome, while you're reading them, instead of saying like, here's a new legal research platform that you have to go to and remember to go to on top of Westlaw, Lexis, whatever legal search you use, plus Outlook, plus Microsoft Word, plus your case management system, plus whatever else you use. I think fitting things into the workflow is going to be key in the years to come, because, when I practiced law, we had, so much stuff going on our computers that asking us to add something new was a huge pain, right? Time management system, Outlook, Word, case management, whatever else we had, that's hard. So I think fitting things into that is going to be key. And you had another question, but I forgot what it was. I was talking too much.
No, I was just asking, in such a situation, what are the checkpoints that technology can help? And I think you fairly answered that question. But on your point of Word and Outlook, right, and just having tools that don't add to your work but actually subtract from it, I was wondering if you've come across something that has been useful, right? And it may sound obvious to you, but for our audience, it may not be. So don't, just like keep a much more open space in that sense. That's been useful within, let's say, the Word, Outlook, or your web browser environment that has helped you or has helped attorneys,
Yeah. So, so I mentioned Jurisage, which is a new tool. I think there's a company in the US called Casetext that is doing some really interesting things with, almost like automated drafting of legal documents, if I remember what they're doing correctly. And, things that, take work away in a good way, from an attorney. Things that check citations for you automatically on cases and tell you hey, you need to look at this one, or, these are all fine. You don't need to spend your time checking on these. Things like that, things that fit into the workflow. Unfortunately, a lot of legal technology products still fit into that, let's add something, let's add a step. And very few, at least that I've seen, are shortening workload or taking steps away. So I think there's definitely a mismatch there, from what I've seen in technology and law practice still. The case management platform Clio in the US is doing a good job of, bringing things into its platform. So it's a cloud-based, exclusively case management platform. So it runs in your browser. And when they add a new feature or something like that, they're very conscious of, does this really need to be a feature? What's it going to do? Where can we fit it into an attorney's workflow, where it actually makes sense, and then, automate as much as possible so that it's not like, hey, we have an integration with, some other tool, some billing system, right? So it just means you click on a link and you go to that billing system. They're very good about, saying, where can we fit that in? Can we make billing automatic? Can you, say when you open a matter in their system, I want to bill monthly, and it does it for you. It generates a bill for your review every month and says, do you want to send that? Things like that. I'm not saying that's an actual feature that they have, but that's the kind of thing that they develop. It's really, really intuitive and really, really well thought out. They're the first example of a really, really well thought out platform that I can think of.
Okay, great. I'm hoping that we can have something for the Indian jurisdiction also super soon, especially in terms of templates and all of that, because that is where the major gap sort of lies with all of these foreign products for us. I just have one last question, which is that what should somebody who's starting out, and really trying to bring in a change or is trying to get into more on the access to justice side, right? Where should they start? Do they volunteer? I don't know, right? Do they give some time off to pro bono? I don't know. What has worked in your experience, right? And where should they really just get going?
If they want to get started with pro bono, the best place to look is, like a legal nonprofit in their area to see what are the opportunities there. Can I help out in some way? A lot of nonprofits offer clinics. So a good example in the US is, we have legal aids that do eviction clinics where people facing eviction can come in on, like a Tuesday night and bring in their paperwork and sit down with an attorney who's volunteering, and the attorney helps them say, what are your options? Do you have any defenses? What can you argue in court? That kind of thing. And for attorneys wanting to just get started in pro bono, it's a really low friction way to do that. I think a lot of attorneys get scared about actually representing someone for the full life of their case, right? That's a big commitment, and it's needed, it's necessary, but it's a huge commitment for attorneys. And I think that scares attorneys off. So those kind of clinic formats where you can go in and as an attorney, you may not be the expert in eviction defense, right? But the nonprofit can teach you what you need to know very quickly. And for that person coming in, having an attorney to talk to is a huge help, even though you're not the expert, right? They're talking to an attorney, they're getting their questions answered, they're feeling more confident about their situation, and they're understanding what's going on. So I think that's key. Looking for those kind of low impact ways to get involved, where it's low impact for the attorney, it's low commitment, but it is high impact for the people that you're helping. Even though you may feel like, well, I just went to the clinic, I just answered questions, but for the people that got their questions answered, it's huge. Getting involved in your bar associations as well on their pro bono committees, developing information. I think, a big thing that goes kind of uncelebrated are the attorneys that develop legal information for the public and make sure that it's accurate. Running legal information websites really makes you appreciate having current content that makes sense, that's legally correct, and is updated regularly because laws change. And it takes subject matter experts and lawyers to read through that stuff and say, wait a minute, this law changed, 6 months ago. We need to update this paragraph. So if lawyers are a little, skittish of representing people or, like volunteering in person, that's a great way to get involved too, and it's not time intensive. It just takes knowledge, which attorneys have. So I would look for those opportunities. Taking a pro bono case is great. Yes, I encourage everybody to do that, but also look for those, lower level of commitment ways that you can get involved.
Great. Thank you so much, Sam, for taking out the time today. Just
Thank you.
before we sort of part ways, is there anything that you'd like to add or like to say before we close?
So I really appreciate you giving me this opportunity. When we first got in contact, I started, looking at India's judicial system, and India has, like a really robust online judicial system. In a lot of ways, it's ahead of what the US has. So, like text message notifications from court, things like that, stuff that we've been pushing for in the US but haven't made a lot of headway with. So, I think that's really, really cool, and keep up the good work with that. Hopefully in the US, we can, learn some of the lessons that y'all have learned in India, about the usefulness of that, and, like online hearings, things like that. That's still in the baby steps in the United States, and only in a few jurisdictions still. Although after the COVID pandemic, it's gotten more prevalent, but, like seeing that, I was like, wow, that's awesome. So that was great.
So, I mean, of course, we're doing all of that, but it's the same thing, right? Like now that the pandemic is gone and everybody's back to physical hearings and just being in person, we've seen like a fairly substantial downturn in terms of just how many online hearings actually still do happen. But yeah, of course, like a lot of people changed a lot of ways for the better. So that is great. But yeah,
for sure.
Thank you so much once again for taking out the time, Sam. I think I had a great time speaking with you, and I'm sure there's a lot that people can learn, and I'm really hoping that people start to learn Python the hard way after this interview.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Thank you so much.